Hi, how's it going? It's a little too bright. Okay, that's better. I finally got first of all, welcome. I am, as you can see, the background has changed because I'm now broadcasting from a brand new apartment in a brand new city in a brand new state. Uh I'm now in Minneapolis. I am a Minneapolisotan. I don't actually know what Minnesotan or I know that the demonym from Minnesota is Minnesotan, but I don't yet know what Minneapolis is. A Minneapolite? I don't know. Anyway, beverage of choice for the stream is a poppy. Minneapolitician, I like that. I've been to a Costco here. One of the first things I did was I was due for a Costco trip when I left Seattle. So as soon as I got here, I went to a Costco business center, which I'd never been to, and you can get like a whole goat here at the Costco business center. I assume it must be a regional thing, unless all Costco. It was my first Costco business center I'd ever been to, so every new item that I saw, I was like, "Is this like a Minnesota thing or a Costco business center thing?" Um, but you can get it all, like a whole entire goat. I wound up getting a box of goat meat with the bones still in it for birria. Birria, a goat stew dish type deal. Anyway, um, yeah, as someone in the chat already pointed out, these are moving boxes behind me. I'm still getting unpacked. It's been it's been a whirlwind. I'll probably wind up describing the move throughout most of the stream tonight. Um, Jake Samuels asks, a whole goat, like alive, or to cook and eat? No, it's a goat that's already been butchered, but it's like hanging in a freezer, like a side of beef that like Rocky punched in Rocky, but except it's a goat. But yeah, they had I was worried they wouldn't have poppies here. I was like, I don't know, maybe they're like some West Coast thing. But they had instead of 6 poppy flavors to choose from, they had 10. So they had even more poppy. I was also worried when I was in Seattle. I was every time I went to Costco, I would get a 1 pound bucket. And they sell them in these little plastic tubs, a 1 pound tub of cheese curds. And I was like, they'll probably still have those in the Midwest, right? They don't have them in 1 pound tubs in the Midwest. They have them in 5 pound bags. um, but yeah, so for those who don't know the story, I was living in Seattle 6 weeks ago. Well, it was slightly more than that, probably 8 weeks ago now, probably 2 months ago. Um, I knew I was gonna move, but I didn't know where. Um, I knew like I'd been living in Seattle for 3 years, and I knew for a long time that I couldn't stay there permanently. There was no reason to stay there permanently because I was never, ever, ever going to be able to buy a house there. The houses there are crazy expensive. It is a relatively small isthmus with 700,000 people packed onto it, spilling out of the top and bottom. Um, and all the jobs are right in the center, where all the homes are like $2 million. Um, anyway, to get within an hour of downtown, you need to be able to spend like $999,000 on a house. It was never ever going to happen. Um, I rented a basement in a nice neighborhood. It was the kind of neighborhood that even the people who live there can't afford to buy there anymore. It's a neighborhood full of boomers who bought 15, 20, 30 years ago and have been desperately trying to keep up with their own property taxes ever since. People who bought their homes for $400,000 that are now worth, 1.5 million. I rented a basement there. Um, and I paid a lot. I paid more in rent in Seattle than I ever did anywhere other time in my life, by a lot, by nearly my apartment in Seattle was nearly $1,000 more expensive than my apartment when I left Chicago. Um, and it was the kind of neighborhood where like a $1.8 million home opened across the street from me, and I went to the open house, and it was like it was cramped, and it was dark, and it looked like it was assembled at IKEA, and it was like shoddy construction. They're like one of the closet doors was like crooked, and it sold within like 2 weeks of hitting the market, and I'm just like, I what tech bro is buying all these things? So anyway, and the only way I could afford that apartment was because my partner was also working full time. Um, and my partner, who I'm ferociously protective of my partner's privacy, um, so I'm not going to get into all the details. But my partner had to leave their job. Um, what I'll say is it was kind of it was it was the kind of it was a long time coming, and it happened overnight. Um, it was a hostile work environment, and it became clear that this employer had no interest in um, accommodating a disability request. And my partner had to give notice. And we were sitting there and we were like, well, we know we're not going to stay in Seattle permanently. Does my partner look for another job? Or do we um, weigh anchor and head to any of the other cities we've been talking about moving to for the last like 2 years? Okay, there are cats behind me. Um, and one of them wants to play and the other one doesn't, and the one that doesn't, she's making her boundary enforcement noises. It's so dark back there you probably won't be able to see, but anyway, yeah, so that was the situation in Seattle. Couldn't afford rent on just what I made. um and we we like Seattle, we like the Pacific Northwest. I like the day job I had there. um but it was a lot of things happened. A lot of hard stuff happened while we were living in Seattle. There were two toes got broken against the tub, and um, there was a string of terrible bosses for my partner, and there were sudden illnesses, and a death of a parent, um, and it wasn't. A lot of life happened to us when we were there, and the point is that my partner's jobs were all bad while we were there, and my partner hadn't had a chance to rest in 3 years, and so we just both mutually agreed it was like, it sounds like a good time to get out, move to a cheaper city, um, and go from there. And we moved into this apartment 2 weeks ago today. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. The the move was it was the kind of move where everybody was like, "Did the move go well?" And it's like, "It didn't. No." But you can't just say that. So I just tell people, "We've settled in nice." Um anyway, it had to the move had to be accomplished very quickly. We had about 5 weeks between, okay, we are going to move to Minneapolis, and then getting the keys for an apartment in Minneapolis. There was about 5 weeks to get everything organized. And so, we did it 3 years ago, but we had like 5 months to prepare. So it was all just an incredibly accelerated process this time around. Um, what so what did we do? We had to pack very quickly. It was the fastest we've ever packed, and we have more stuff than we've ever had. It's just kind of the consequence of being 36. You've bought stuff that you like. Um, there was a time, sometime in the last like 3 or 4 years, I decided I was like, screw it. I like physical books. I'm not. I'm gonna stop buying. Not even stop buying ebooks, but like when I want a physical copy of a particular book, I just told myself I was just gonna buy it, and then figure out moving it later, because I like physical books. Um, and so I had like 3 boxes of books to move instead of two in this move, and um, I don't know. We got a nice bed in the last 3 years. Like we've never had a nice, good bed before, and so we had a nice bed. Anyway, I don't remember where I was going with this. So anyway, we're getting ready for the move and finding an apartment in Minneapolis. We figured the only way to do it right is to have an apartment ready to go. Because like for like a half a second, we were like, well, do we just drive to Minneapolis and then put our stuff in storage and then stay in a hotel for a week until we find an apartment? And we're like, that's not really gonna work. We have a lot of pets now. We have more pets than we had to move out to Seattle. So I was like, no, we gotta just what we decided we was gonna do virtual viewings um of apartments in Minneapolis and just pick one based on as much information as we could glean from videos from the realtors. Um, and at first we were excited to start looking because we were like, oh, winter's coming, so all the prices of apartments are going to go down, and they did go down, but so did the supply. Because apparently, I've lived in Chicago and Seattle, two cities with reputations for getting very cold. Um, They don't and but Minneapolis is the first city where they don't like, they'll extend a lease past winter, or they'll cut off a lease before winter just so that they don't have to relet it during the coldest months of the year. I've never been in a city that did that before, but apparently that's common practice in Minneapolis. So what it means is that, yes, the price of apartments went down, but so did the supply. So there weren't a lot of good listings, and the first one that we wanted, not to get too far into the weeds, but we had a verbal agreement to rent this unit, and then the guy, it was like for rent by owner. It wasn't the management company. It was just the dude who owned the property was renting it, and he couldn't get us a lease without typos, and not just typos, not just like my name spelled wrong, but it like the contract would say like, um the rent is, and then I'll spell out $1,500 per month, and then in parentheses after that, $1,200. So it would have like contradictory figures, and I would like fix it. I would like strike through what he wrote and then write the correct version after it, and I'd send it to him, and I'd be like, "Hey, I noticed there were some figures here. Um, I've indicated what I think should be changed. If you're okay with that, implement the changes and send it back to me." And then like 36 hours would go by, and he'd send it to me, but it would still have errors. Like he wouldn't have fixed them all because he reverted to his original draft and was just like, anyway. Um, so the point is, we didn't actually have a lease signed until day 2 of our drive to Minneapolis, which was really nerve-wracking. It's one of those things where everything turned out fine, but it was mind-bogglingly stressful. Um, Sonatira says 3 boxes of books is not enough books. Thank you. That's very valid. I would have so many more books if I hadn't been a lifelong renter. I keep looking over here because this apartment came with one set of built-in bookshelves, and that's where I put my books. And I like looking at them. I don't know. I like looking at my books. um, but yeah, I would have a lot more. One of my dreams is because I've had a Kindle since college, which is to say, for 13 years now, I've had a Kindle, because ebooks were a lot cheaper, or usually cheaper than hardcovers, and that was important for a long time. And I can also carry a bigger library with me when I have my Kindle, so it was very useful. but my dream one day is to take all the books that I love on my Kindle and purchase physical copies one day. Like 3 of my favorite books are the 3 books by Andy Weir, The Martian, Artemis, and his latest, Project Hail Mary. I do not own physical copies of 3 of my favorite books because I bought the ebooks because they were cheaper. Anyway, I want more books. Nonsensical Compound says, like DVDs, physical books are handy for evangelizing. Easier to tell friends you've got to check this out when they have a copy that doesn't need returning within a couple of weeks. Nobody's ever borrowed a book from me. I mean, I don't know, maybe twice in my life, but people do borrow movies. That's more common. So anyway, so we had like 4 weeks to go, and we knew we wanted to go to Minneapolis. Had trouble finding an apartment, and then it was time to. I took a week off work. Spent 3 days packing, and we had been pre-packing as much as possible, but it wasn't enough. We packed for 3 days. We needed 4. And the way that we paid the piper on that is that the morning I picked up the rental truck, we loaded it up with what we had packed by noon, and we were kind of supposed to hit the road once, like within an hour, but we were still packing up boxes inside the apartment of like cleaning supplies and food, all this random all like the random flotsam. There was just like anyway. So we didn't hit the road the first night until 7 p.m., which is way behind schedule. It's about 7 hours, but it was a whole day of driving behind schedule the very first day, which again was nerve-wracking. We only wound up driving 2 hours the first night before we stopped. Anyway, you probably don't need to hear like a beat for beat. I don't know. Things settled down after the first day. Once it was on the road, it got a little better. Day 2, we actually signed a lease, which was good. Although then I spent like my parents flew in to help us make the move, and I asked my dad to take a shift of driving so that I could set up utilities on my phone while we were driving through Montana, which is difficult because there are long stretches of I-94 or I-90, one of those, whichever one crosses Montana, where you don't get internet on your phone. It's just a dead zone. So internet would go in and out. Anyway, it was so like one day of the drive was just me sitting in the passenger seat setting up utilities for the new apartment that we had just signed a lease for. I didn't enjoy this road trip at all. Not that that's the point wasn't to enjoy it. Like it wasn't a vacation. It was a move. But like when I drove from Chicago to Seattle, I enjoyed much of that drive. I did not enjoy much of this drive. There were just too many variables, too many unknowns, too many things that had gone wrong from the start. It was just very stressful. And we had the 3 pets with us. We had 4 pets. Anyway, we have our dog, a 15-year-old Chihuahua, Aya. We have Thomason, the 4-year-old Tabby, and we had just gotten Otto, a 4-month-old kitten. When we got him, a move wasn't on our radar. Like 2 months ago, there was no idea in our heads that we were gonna move. And then like right after we got him, within like 2 weeks, it was like, oh, we think within 2 weeks of getting a new kitten, we were at the point where it was like, oh, my partner might be is probably going to give notice, which means we're probably going to move. So anyway, so we had these the cat, the 2 cats and the dog, who were they were a logistical challenge. We put a litter box in the trunk, and every time we like stopped for gas, we would put the trunk in the back seat with the cats and let them go if they wanted to. Um, um, Feeding, we wound up feeding them like once in the morning in each hotel and then once in the evening in each hotel. But what that did was we couldn't, like, when you're not driving with animals, it's very easy to be like it's 7 p.m., but the driver, whoever's driving, will be like, "Oh, I'm feeling good. I got my second wind. I can keep going." And then we go, "Okay, great." And then you can drive to like 8 or 9 or 10 and make up time. But when you're traveling with the pets, you really can't you really can't go more than like 8 hours at a time, because they need to eat. They need to be let out of their carriers. Otherwise, you're just risking too much discomfort for the animals. So anyway, um, what it wound up translating into was, every morning I was kind of, um, beating a drum with for my family to be like, okay, the way that we make up time is we leave the hotel early in the morning, so let's get going. So that was kind of my stress response to try and make up the time, in the drive. Anyway, I'm behind in the chat. Jake Samuel says, if it's not prying too much, what was it about Minneapolis that drew you guys? That's a great question. Because neither of us had ever set foot in the city before, and it's crazy when I, it sounds crazy when I say it out loud. Um, but it's not like boarding a steamship in the 1700s to cross the Atlantic because you hear they got jobs in the New World. It's not that kind of like they got Google Maps. Like we did like as much virtual touring of the city as we could. But why Minneapolis? A couple reasons. One, we wanted a blue state. We wanted the bluest state legislature we could find, and Minneapolis is really one of the bluer. It's more blue than Washington. I know Washington State has a very blue reputation, um, and it like got more blue votes. A greater percentage of the population of Washington voted blue than did Minnesota, but the state legislatures are passing more progressive laws here than they did in Washington State. They just do. Um, so anyway, blue state legislature, um, uh, low housing costs. We're tired of being highway robbed, at the cost of living. Illinois is an expensive state. Washington is an expensive state if you want to live in the blue areas. And Minneapolis is not. Like I encourage you, if you want to get a sense of it, like just look at Zillow. Um, like weirdly cheap, very nice houses here. Well, compared to every other blue state that we looked at, California is a no-go. The city that whole state is way too expensive and not nearly as progressive as their reputation allows. Um, I actually want to do a video one day about how specifically Los Angeles, but California as a whole really is. It's not the it's not this leftist. It's not the leftist capital of America. It's the neoliberal capital of America, which is very different from leftist. Anyway, whereas Minneapolis is actually doing things like they're like mandating. They passed a string of legislation like 1 or 2 years ago that um like uh I'm blanking, but it's like minimum wage. They do like workers protections for gig economy, like Uber drivers, like they get actual like workers protections. um I don't know, it's a lot of cool stuff like that. um so anyway, blue state legislature, cheap housing. It regularly pops up on like the happiest cities in America lists. It's got what's considered a very high standard of living. We want nature. We don't want to live in the middle of a metropolis. Like we want to be able to have like access to green spaces, and there's a ton of it here. It's I've always lived next to a big giant body of water. Like I grew up in South Florida, a couple miles from the beach. And then I moved to Chicago, which is right next to Lake Michigan. and then I moved to Seattle, which is on Puget Sound. And then I was like, oh, Minneapolis doesn't have the big body of water. But once you actually get here, the state is called the land of 10,000 lakes for a reason. There are lakes all over the place. Like you can't drive 2 miles without going around another lake. But I like that about it. Um, so anyway, like my partner and I have already found our favorite little. We just like drove to. Um, there's this creek, this river called Minnehaha, and it like sort of snakes through the city. And there's these roads and bike paths and walking trails that follow it pretty much the whole way. And we just drive there and we walk, and it's been fantastic. The cold doesn't scare us. You know, we actually missed the cold when we left Chicago and went to Seattle. Seattle has a reputation for being really cold and rainy. Um, I grew up in South Florida, which is rainier than Seattle, and I loved Chicago, which is a lot colder than Seattle. So anyway, the cold didn't intimidate us. But yeah, you asked why Minneapolis. It's the cheapest place to live this left, I guess, in America. It's like one of like we were looking at like 3 or 4 places. My parents really wanted me to move to the Carolinas, and I was like, absolutely not. Too red. So anyway, it's also something that surprised us that didn't show up in our research, but when we arrived here, we immediately found out this is a nice food town. Like better than Seattle. Like no offense, Seattle. Seattle has some great places to eat. Don't get me wrong, but they're difficult to find. Um, we went to a lot of places with like 4 and 5 star Yelp ratings that were just terrible. Um, so the good places of Seattle to eat are kind of through like trial and error. And then all of our favorite places kept closing, and they all kept saying the rent was too high, that they couldn't keep up with how much their landlords were charging them, even though they ran great businesses. 2 of our favorite places closed just within like a year of us discovering them. So anyway, but this place, Minneapolis, has like fantastic coffee. They have my partner's celiac, so we only eat at places with gluten-free options, and they got a lot of that here. And it's not just that they have gluten-free options, it's that the gluten-free food is pretty good. Like we already tried this place called Rectangle Pizza. Rec with a W, like something being wrecked. But they also serve their pizzas in these rectangles. And it's pan style. So it's like got that blackened crust all the way around. So it's supposed to be crunchy, which is how most gluten-free crusts wind up coming out anyway. So anyway, they do a really good way of using gluten-free dough in a way that it's not like one of those. We've tried a lot of gluten-free food before where it's like, well, it's not good, but you can eat it. Whereas the gluten-free food here, it's like they planned on it being gluten-free so that it would be good. Anyway, big food town. Nonsensical compound says, can't speak for anyone else, but we are here because of your skills specific to narrative building that includes the epic highs and lows of short notice interstate relocation. Okay, so you're saying you do want to hear a play-by-play. Well, I'll get back to that story. Where were we? So first night, we hit the road 7 hours late. Not 7 hours too late. I figured we'd be done loading up the Penske truck by noon. It would take another 2 hours to finish cleaning out the apartment. And then you want to shower before you hit the road. So I figured we'd leave by 2, and we did not leave till like 7:30. And it was rushed. Like the only reason we got out at 7 was because it was like we were all huffing and puffing and doing everything we could, and like the only thing we didn't cut any corners on was cleaning the apartment because we liked our landlord in Seattle. He was really good to us, and we wanted to leave the place spotless for him. But anyway, it was a mad dash to hit the road 5 hours behind schedule, and we had the pets. which was it put restrictions on how the drive could be accomplished. Um, Something I learned on the trip is that every hotel sets its own pet policy. So um, it's like even the same chain of hotels, like in one city, it will say, "Oh yeah, we love pets. Come on down." And then in the next city, the same hotel will be like, "Well, there are breed restrictions. We don't take cats, and there is a $100 deposit." And then another town over, it'll say no pets, none whatsoever, which was tricky. Um, so it's like juggling like price and who has availability and what their pet policy is. Um, uh, so finding a hotel every night was stressful. Um, and then there were a couple of times where we couldn't make it to the hotel 50 miles up the road, which does accept pets. So we booked a room in a hotel that accepts dogs and kind of just walked the cats through the lobby in their carriers. There was actually one one moment in particular when um we had a cat in a carrier and we were going to bring him inside, and the only elevator in the entire hotel is right next to the front desk. And it's like, okay, well, so long it doesn't look like a cat carrier. Like it kind of looks like we could pass it off as like a backpack or something, or a duffel, um, like a hard-sided duffel. So let's just carry him in. And so long as he doesn't meow as we're walking past the front desk, it should be fine. And so we go to the car, and he immediately starts meowing his head off as soon as we open the door, and we're like, okay, well, let's start walking. And we start walking, and he quiets down. And then I go to reach for the hotel lobby door, and he meow. And I'm like, all right, we're just gonna see how this plays out. And so we open the door and we enter, um, and nobody's at the front desk. Like it's late at night. I don't know. They stepped away for a minute. We're like, perfect. So we walk to the hotel, and or to the elevator rather, and we press the button to go up. And this is the slowest elevator known to mankind. We're sitting there waiting, and then the front desk person comes back. Uh, in fact, they don't just come back to the front desk. They have to walk past. We see them coming down the hallway, and they have to walk past us to continue to somewhere else in the hotel. And we just look up and we wave and we smile, and she smiles back, and she passes us, and the doors open, and we step inside. The doors shut behind us, and then immediately the cat starts meowing again. But, it's not even like the situation it's not even like the stakes were that high. Like, the if the hotel worker even cared, like, that's the first thing. It's like the hotel worker might not give a shit. Uh, and then even if they do, like, we're already checked in for the night. Like, what are like, worst case scenario, they would just, like, charge us a fee or something. Anyway, so it's not even like it was a high stakes situation, but in an already stressful trip, it was it was just another source of stress. Was just worrying that some hotel employee would like get pissed at the fact that we're traveling with pets. I don't know. So anyway, uh we're making our way across. Montana is a long state. I had never driven, I think it was like 740 miles, and still been in the same state before. um we did stop one night in it's a town that most people who haven't been to it have ever heard of it. It's called Missoula, Montana. um Pretty close to the Idaho border. But it's the second biggest city in Montana. It's like a big college town. Like, they don't have skyscrapers or anything as far as I know, but they're it's the kind of it's like 10 miles of like Targets and Costco's and Taco Bell's and every national chain. They got a location in Missoula. That's the kind of place that Missoula is. But so we wanted to stop for dinner, Um, and we needed gluten-free options. And I was worried. I was like, I don't know if Montana cares about gluten-free. And so I jump on my phone, which thankfully there is internet and phone service at Missoula because it's a big enough city. Um, and I find the first result is Montana Jack's. Montana Jack's family restaurant with a dedicated gluten-free fryer. And I was like, "That's fantastic." Dedicated gluten-free fryer is like it's like the gold standard in gluten-free dining. Um, so we punch it in the GPS, and I'm looking at reviews, and everything I read is like Montana Jack's family restaurant. I'm like, "Cool." And we roll up, and this thing is it's a casino. It's like Montana Jack's casino and restaurant. And which is fine. It's not like we can't eat it at a so we go inside. And what I can see and what we all realize as soon as we walk in is that this is a casino that also serves food. that like the that like it's got a bunch of slot machines. Um and everybody is sitting at a slot machine with a water. That's the kind of place it is. Um we the first person we see, we're like, "Yeah, we're dinner for 5." And he looks at us and he goes, "I work in the kitchen," and just kept walking. And we're like, "Okay." So we finally find the hostess finds us, and the first thing she says is, "5? I'm gonna have to push some tables together." And we're like, "Okay, is that a problem? It's not a problem for us. Do you want help pushing them together?" So, so we have no clue what kind of food they're gonna serve here, but they do brag about their gluten-free fryer. It's even on their, they have one of those little signs out front where, like, someone with a ladder can change the letters, and it says on there, like, "Dedicated gluten-free fryer." So we're like, "Okay, somebody's proud of it." And so we're the only people eating there, and we all order, and they bring out the food, and it's fantastic. I got I don't know, fried chicken strips with French fries. Like I posted a picture of it on my Instagram, and it was really really good. It was like such a fun, weird little. That was like the first good thing that happened on the trip. Like in a trip that was like day two was already like harried and stressful. That was a I was sitting there and I was like, "Okay, this is fun. This is actually a bit of fun that we're having," which was nice. Um, Nonsensical Compound knows Missoula because of Hank Green. Is he from Missoula? I don't know anything about Hank Green. Just people over the years have told me that I remind them of him, but like I don't know. I haven't read his books. I haven't watched his videos. I just know him by reputation alone. But it'd be cool if he's from Missoula. Um, Nonsensical Compound says, "Gamble on our floors, not on your gluten intolerance." So yeah, that was fun. Um, Stopping at Montana Jackson, Missoula, and then a lot of Montana to drive through. And then what was the state after that? It was North Dakota. There's even less in North Dakota than there is in Montana. We stopped for the night at in Bismarck, North Dakota. Um, which was I think it's the second biggest city in North Dakota after I think Fargo's the first. Um, anyway, I think it was either Fargo or Bismarck were the largest cities between Minneapolis and Seattle, which is kind of mind-boggling. Um, Nonsensical Compound says, as far as I know, Hank's not from Missoula, but has long lived there. Huh. Trying to think what kind of person moves to Missoula. Um, one of the things I was doing as we were going through Montana is I would pull up my phone when I had internet and pull up Zillow and just be like, "What's a house cost in the middle of nowhere like this?" and Montana's weirdly expensive. Um, like, we passed by one random little, like, it looked like an outpost. Like, there were no there it's the kinda town with no chains of any kind. Like, they have, like, their corner store, which is operated by someone who lives in the town. Little towns like that, um, like a two-bedroom, two-bathroom house going for 500,000, and I was like, "I don't understand." And then I find out that Montana is considered one of the worst states for housing versus income, and I'm like, I believe it because we were passing by middle of nowhere, um, and there were houses that I can't touch. So anyway, um, so that was Montana, and then we get to North Dakota. Whole lot of nothing in North Dakota. Whole lot of nothing in eastern Montana, but there's even less in South Dakota. um, Bismarck and Fargo were like the only two highlights, I guess you could say. Of course, that was day 3 of the trip, and it was kind of a blur for me because I was just let's eat up some road. Let's just I could taste it. We were almost to Minneapolis, and I wanted the trip to be over because I was in a constant state of heightened stress the whole time. Um, that's just the way it was. It was a very stressful move. Uh, and like every time something good happened, every time something good locked, every time another part of the plan locked in place, I got calmer. But for me, it was like we had to hit the road with so much still up in the air, like we didn't even have a lease, and that sort of thing's hella stressful to me. I like having the plan set. I like having preparations done. Um, and it really felt like this trip. I was forced to lay track down in directly in front of the locomotive the whole time. Um, so anyway, um, so that was stressful. Um, I think I missed somebody's question earlier. Jason Tucker says, I know you've been busy settling in, but have you had a chance to visit the Trilon Cinema or the Heights Theater or some of our other indie houses? Those two are on my radar. I have seen them and looking up theaters to visit. But the only theater I've gone to so far is it's a brand I was familiar with from Chicago, the Landmark Theater, Lagoon Cinema in Uptown. That's the one theater I've been to. I'm probably going to be a regular. I love it. I love Landmark. Landmark is my favorite theater chain. Um, and it's a fun little, like, I think they only have 5 screens, but 5 is a good number. Like 3 screens and all they're gonna show is like Marvel. But 5, they can get some really, like, I pulled up they're now playing, and there were 5 movies listed, and I had only heard of 2 of them. I was like, I don't even know what these other 3 are, which is exciting. Like, that's a plus in my book. I wanna be able to go see stuff, um, on a big screen that you wouldn't normally get to see on a big screen. That's the value of Landmark for me. But I will check those other ones out. Sonatira says, as someone from a tiny town with no chains, it's very carefully zoned to exclude chains and look small town. People pay to live like that. That makes sense. Although, one of the towns that I passed, I wish I remember the name. It had like a population of like 600 people, and it had its own Wikipedia page, which surprised me. And at the very end of the Wikipedia page, it's like, oh, by the way, Bill Pullman has a ranch here. And I'm like, oh, cool. Good for Bill Pullman. Nonsensical Compound says, ooh, Landmark's E Street Cinema in DC is the best. So I became familiar with Landmark with their Chicago location, which is a palace. It's like it's got like this circular staircase that goes like 4 or 5 floors up. So it feels like you're ascending into like movie heaven. It's just like positively palatial. And then I found out they had one in Seattle, and I was like, "Oh my gosh." And I drove up to it and I was like, "Is this the theater?" And it's this little podunk dollar theater that desperately needs to be repainted and vacuumed, and like their toilet didn't flush properly, and I was like, how are these the same brands? Like, not to not to knock the landmark theater of Seattle, but it was kind of a dump, and I didn't go, and I was like, I don't understand how this brand works. If like they have this movie palace in Chicago, and then in Seattle it's this rundown little like little strip mall type deal. But anyway, the one in Minneapolis is nice. Um, Looking forward to becoming a regular at Landmark again. Jason Tucker says, if you like the Lagoon, you'd probably also like the main cinema where MSPIFF is held. Um, Minneapolis St. Paul International Film Festival. Is that what that stands for? I'll look that one up too. The main cinema. I will actually write that down to make sure I don't forget. Anyway, the theater scene in Seattle is so. Like as a movie fan, I found it mediocre. Like the theater going experience. In 3 years, I only went to 4 films in theaters in Seattle just because I didn't like any of them. Um, Whereas here, I've been here 2 weeks and I've already been to 1 movie, and I'm probably gonna go to another this weekend, which I'm excited about. I saw Heretic at the Lagoon. Heretic is, the Hugh Grant movie where he is, terrorizing 2 Mormon evangelicals who come to his door. Uh I like that one. I'll probably talk a bit about it in a video about the movies of 2024 at the end of the year. Jason, it sounds like you live in Minneapolis, or at least you're very familiar with it. Anyway, one thing that happened in Seattle is like a lot of people who follow me would either comment on social media or message me privately and be like, "Hey, I live in Seattle, and me and my partner would love to host you or take you to Mox for board games or something." Because I mentioned in my video on the thing that I hadn't made a lot of friends in Seattle, in part because of it being COVID, the height of COVID when I moved, but also because Seattle is kind of a standoffish town. um, but anyway, like people so like it wasn't like entirely unprompted, but people reached out to me and they were like, "Hey, if you want to meet people in Seattle, I'm a person you can meet." And I had a very mid 2000s scaredy cat reaction to like people on the internet offering to meet up in public, or offering to meet up in the real world. I was like, "Ah." um but in hindsight, I think that was, I don't know. I wish I'd been more outgoing in Seattle once COVID calmed down. Um I feel like I could have done more to make friends. Anyway, and I'm hoping that'll change in Minneapolis. People here seem a lot friendlier. Not that Seattle is unfriendly, but there's a term, the Seattle freeze, which is it just speaks to Seattle. They're friendly, but not warm or inviting, if that makes sense. Anyway, um, yeah. So happy to be back in the Midwest where people seem more interested in opening up, trusting. I don't know. Jason Tucker says that's Minnesota nice. Okay, cool. Okay. Where was I in the trip? So we stayed in Bismarck our final night. And then the next day it was the final day and I was the one who wanted to hit the road as fast as possible. Um my family was like, "Hey, there's this statue of a giant buffalo that's like 2 miles off of this exit. Do we want to?" And I'm like, "Nope." I'm like, "Nope, next time." um the cats were getting really not nervous, I guess you could say. By the fourth day they were just like, okay, when do we get to roam a house again? We're tired of being in our carriers. um And so it was the final day of the trip, but we were making more frequent stops for the pets than any previous day of the trip. Anyway, um, so we finally, I don't even remember seeing Minneapolis for the first time. In my planning for this trip, I was like, we picked this city, not actually having ever set foot in it before. Seeing it for the first time is gonna be something. I'm gonna remember my impression, and I have no memory of seeing it. I was just looking at the GPS and navigating the roads and driving straight towards the apartment that we had picked out 2 days earlier. Um, and what happens at that point? We finally reach Minneapolis after 4 days of driving, um, with uh and we get to the apartment, and it's nice. There's a couple of things that we didn't notice from the video tour that we weren't crazy about, but it's like I don't like the experience of having to pick an apartment based solely on or not MP4s, on the realtor holding their phone up and like panning it around. Um like it You don't get a you don't get a great conveyance of of how the space flows. Um you can't tell how fast it takes the water to heat up. Things like that. The water does heat up fine here, but that's just one example of something I was worried about, because I was like, we don't. Anyway, I do not like the experience of picking an apartment based on virtual tours. But we felt we didn't want to drive into Minneapolis and not have anywhere to live. So we bit the bullet, and this place is nice. We lucked out. I know it's not much to look at right now, but it's got a nice big living room, biggest living room we've had in probably 2 or 3 apartments. It has a gas fireplace. Never had a fireplace of any kind before. Um, the pets love it. That was one of the first sources um of relief and happiness once we arrived, was that all the pets were thrilled to be out of their carriers, to be, the cats immediately start running up and down the stairs, um, chasing each other, and that was fun. But so we arrive, and the troubles weren't over. Unpacking is stressful. Um, there was, we were everything that was different from our impressions from the Zoom tour was a sudden source of stress. It was like, oh God, did we make the wrong choice? What have we done? And there'd be like a little moment of rising panic with everything, with every new surprise with the apartment. Um and anyway, as like within hours of us getting our keys, my partner got a cold. Um I think I think my partner's body was just waiting for a place to collapse. Um and which So like we unloaded the truck and started unpacking, but things slowed down because my partner had a cold, and you can't just unpack everything. It's a- it the kitchen is a weird layout, and we have a lot of kitchen gear. My partner makes a lot of their own food in order to stay gluten free, and so we have a lot of specialized kitchen equipment that most people don't have, and figuring out where that stuff goes in the kitchen requires my partner's input. So sort of had to wait for the cold to die down. And then I got a cold. I'm probably not 100% over it. I'm probably at like, I've already, well, I mean, like I've already worked out. Like I unpacked my treadmill and jogged for 30 minutes the other night. So I'm at like 90% probably. But the point is, I also caught a cold. Anyway, I caught a cold. That's so boring. I'll tell you what actually happened is, the first night, like, I laid down in bed and I cried my fucking eyes out. Um, it was a very stressful experience, this move. Uh, I felt like I did it poorly. Um, I felt like it was, sort of felt I don't wanna use the word eviction because eviction is a very specific kind of violence that I have never suffered, but it felt like we had to leave Seattle against our will. Um, it felt like we were sort of being kicked out of a state that didn't want anything to do with us, even though we really liked it. We really liked the Pacific Northwest. Love being able to wake up and see and just like walk not even 20 minutes, 5 minutes down the road and see Puget Sound, see the Olympic Mountains. That was an incredible thing to be able to do, and we knew the places we liked going and eating, and it had been hard fought knowledge to acquire, and we had two really good friends there, and it sort of felt like we had to leave against our will, and I didn't let myself feel it until we reached Minneapolis, and I had a bed to collapse in and a door to shut behind me. Um, and it feels silly to complain about because it's like it wasn't an eviction. Other people have gone through so much harder situations, but it was just it was just a lot. Um, and it wasn't something that I could let it felt like the kind of negative experience that you can't let yourself feel while you're going through it because there's too many problems to solve, and you can't be dealing with um like just the emotional weight of it all too. Um I don't know if that's healthy, but that's how I got through it. um yeah, so nonsensical compound has mentioned the tarantula. I did have a fourth pet, Satine, my Brazilian red and white tarantula. The long story short, she didn't survive the trip. Um she was packed very carefully in there's specific ways to pack tarantulas. Basically she was in a very large deli cup. She was in the cylinder, which was there's bedding inside the cylinder, and then the cylinder is wrapped in several layers of protective tissue so that she can't be jostled. Um, but she hadn't eaten for about 6 weeks before the trip began, which they do that sometimes. Tarantulas. It usually means they're prepping for a molt. They shed their skin. It's one of the coolest things that tarantulas do. They don't eat for several weeks, and then they cover the floor of their terrarium with webbing, and then they flip over onto their backs, and they pop the skin of their backs open, and they wriggle out of their skin. Uh, it's one of the coolest things to see, and I was really looking forward to seeing it. But in hindsight, I don't even know if she was prepping for a molt. She might have, I don't know, she might have just been sick. It's very difficult to determine if a tarantula is sick. They don't give a lot of external signals. Anyway, for whatever the point is that she clearly didn't have enough um, gas in the tank, energy stores, um, fat deposits, whatever you want to call it. Uh, to I unwrapped her at the destination because a tarantula can go 4 days without food, no problem. I would usually only feed her like a worm every weekend, and she'd be fine with that. So I wasn't worried about her. I mean, I was concerned because she hadn't already eaten for 6 weeks. I was worried how the trip would affect her. But anyway, I wish I knew why specifically. But I just unwrapped her when we made it to Minneapolis, and I just saw her through the cylinder, and I was like, she's dead. She didn't make it." Um, and I did a couple things that you can try and revive a tarantula. They're very hardy creatures. Um, I I set her tank up for her, and I put her on the floor of the tank. Um, sort of the last ditch effort thing you can do is drop a couple of drops of water directly into their mouths. I had to flip her over in order to do that because their mouths are on the bottom. Um, but she was gone. Um, and I buried her um, outside the apartment here. And I don't have any synoptic thoughts about it. I'm just uh, it's just something terrible that happened. Um, the and people, coworkers and friends, they're like, "How was the move? Was everything okay?" And I say, "Yes," even though the answer is no. It did not go okay. This move had a body count. But the only way out is through. And so that's where we're at. um Settling in has been nice. Settling in has been good. There are a lot of great things about this apartment that we haven't had in a long time. I got the gas fireplace working yesterday, which was very exciting. The cats love it. They chase each other up and down the living room and the stairs. They've never had stairs before. This is it's 2 levels, um, which I've never even had before. Um, we've been solving problems. Like at first, the router, the internet didn't make it to this room, but then I bought a Wi-Fi extender, which I've never tried before, and then it instantly fixed the internet. So my internet is actually faster here than it was in Seattle, even though in Seattle I had fiber optic. Through it all, I've had my partner. Um, I've been with my partner 18 and a half years. We met in high school. We were best friends for 2 years before we started dating. We've always been friends before we were, I don't know, whatever you want to call. We've been dating a little too long to be calling each other like our I don't know. We call each other our partners, but we're friends before anything else. So I got to make this move with my best friend. And that's been really nice. Nonsensical Compound says it feels silly to complain. In my opinion, it isn't. Wouldn't you sympathize with others feeling the same way about a stressful life change? Yeah, I would. That's just what I do, though. Jake Samuel says 18 and a half years? That's like half your life, right? Yeah, we started dating when we were 17. Yeah. We both hate the term high school sweethearts, though. Despise that term. It's because we never it was like neither of us believe in like fate or destiny or bullshit like that. It's and like we didn't decide to go to college together. Like we were very clear on that in high school. We were like, we're not going to follow each other to college. We're going to apply to anywhere we want, and then we're going to go wherever we want. And I only wound up applying to 3 schools, and only 2 of them accepted me, and one of them was FSU, and I'm not spending 4 years in Tallahassee. So I went to U Chicago, and so did my partner. Like there was if you want to get into the deep lore, there was actually a year of college where we broke up, but we kept rooming together. And that wasn't cantankerous because we've just been best friends for even longer than we've been partnered up. Anyway, wanted to end on a happy note after all the it was a stressful move, but this has been a really good 2 weeks of figuring things out and settling in. It's been after the stress of the trip, it has been a very good settling in experience. That's what I'll say. It's been fun to my TV broke 10 seconds into the move. Uh a a dear beloved family member who was only trying to help was lifting the TV with me, and then he stepped on the power cord and the TV shot out of our hands. And it broke, but I'm working on getting a refund from Amazon, even though it's way outside the refund window. I actually told the person I was chatting with online, I was like, my birthday's this week. And they were like, all right, let me talk to a manager. So I'm probably getting a replacement TV. Um, in the meantime, I'm just watching videos on my computer screen. Um, anyway, I'm excited about the future. I am more excited about the future here than I ever was in Seattle. And it's been a very destabilizing 6 weeks, but I'm um, looking forward to getting more and more uh, stable. Um, it's not just stabilizing though. Like stabilizing sounds like a neutral term. I'm excited about the future here. Not sure exactly what the future is gonna have in store, but I think after the rocky transition, it's been off to a good start. I've had everything here that I need in order to recover from the stresses of the trip. And I think that's as good as anything anybody can ask for. I have my family, I have my pets, which are my family, and a lot of great media and a lot of great food. So so yeah, didn't talk about movies in this stream. My voice is starting to go, as regular viewers know. I only make it about an hour. Um, I've been I did have plans to make a video about tarantula films. I might make a video about that subject someday, but that's just tabled indefinitely. Um, but I needed a video to write that wasn't going to be a massive research project. So the next video is very likely going to be Schlock and Awe, Tammy and the T-Rex, which is an incredible film that people say they hate, but they don't. And I'm going to explain why in a video. And it's been fun to get back into the groove of things. Writing, watching movies, thinking about movies. That's been fun. Nonsensical Compound, just figuring out that my birthday was this week. Yep, yeah, my birthday is Veterans Day, Armistice Day. I always get it off of school anyway, and work if the employer cares about federal holidays. Yep, Scorpio. So people tell me. I know nothing about horoscopes. I just know that people have told me I'm a Scorpio. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for listening to this movie-free live stream from this movie YouTuber who talked about nothing except what the last month of his life was like. Time to watch this Tammy film I've heard so much about. Yep. I look forward to talking it up in the video. Yeah, thanks again for tuning in. I think this one was maybe a bit unconventional, but I appreciate you all listening, and I hope everybody has a great month. And I guess Mike Tyson's supposed to be beating up Jake Paul any hour now. Anyway, I will. I feel like there's so many other things. I keep thinking about other things. 4 days after we moved in, Donald Trump got elected president, which was like a whole nother thing. Didn't even mention it. But my voice is going. Um, anyway, um, thank you all again for watching and listening, and I will talk to you next month. Thanks. Bye.